welcome to this audio recording of Smartphones and Equal Access for People Who Are Blind or Have Low Vision, a report written by Catherine Locke, Katie Ellis, Mike Kent, Leanne McRae and Gwyneth Peaty. This audio version is read by Gwyneth Peaty. The report begins with a foreword by Ron Houghton, CEO of Vision Australia. One of the most significant aspects of the digital revolution that we have experienced over the past decade or so has been the rapid increase in the use of smartphones. Today, more and more Australians are using their smartphones to do online shopping, make banking and other financial transactions, check the weather and the stock market, book taxis, order home delivered food, interact with government services, and a myriad other tasks. The first smartphones were not based on principles of inclusive design, and so were largely unusable by people who are blind or have low vision. Fortunately, much has changed since then, and developers like Apple, Google and Samsung have recognised the many tangible benefits of designing products that everyone can use. Today, people who are blind or have low vision are also able to participate in the smartphone revolution. We know, however, that technological developments can present significant challenges as well as opportunities for people who are blind or have low vision. In 2015, Vision Australia found that although smartphone usage was widespread in younger age groups, few people over 65 who had acquired a vision loss were using smartphones. And across the age spectrum, most people were using their smartphones mainly for making calls, sending texts and checking emails. In 2020, Vision Australia was pleased to collaborate with Curtin University in this research. We recognise Curtin has a long and distinguished record of research in the area of media and communications, as well as extensive experience in working in partnership with the disability sector. I would like to also gratefully acknowledge the financial support that the Australian Research Council provided, and which made the research possible. The result of Vision Australia's collaboration with Curtin is this groundbreaking report that provides a wealth of detail about how our clients are using smartphones, the challenges they face, and the opportunities that Vision Australia can play a positive and proactive role in addressing them. Of particular note is that since our initial research in 2015, smartphone usage by our clients has increased significantly across all age groups, and there has been a corresponding increase in the range of tasks for which smartphones are being used. The report identifies several important opportunities to improve Vision Australia's service delivery in smartphone training and also continues to build key themes for our advocacy activities. For example, by working to raise awareness of the benefits of smartphones for older age groups and to encourage more app developers to follow inclusive design guidelines so that their apps can be used equally by people who are blind or have low vision. Smartphones will undoubtedly develop further in the coming years and will play an ever-increasing role in the way we carry out our work, conduct our business, and live our lives. The findings of the research that it details in this report will help to ensure that people who are blind or have low vision will not be left on the wrong side of the digital divide, but will be able to participate fully in the transformations that smartphones are creating for our society. Ron Houghton, CEO, Vision Australia. Preface. The survey conducted in February and March of 2020 was the last stage of a broader project conducting research on the way people with disabilities use smartphones in their navigation through urban space. The initial stage of this research used focus groups and interviews to uncover what was already suspected. Smartphones are becoming an integral part of navigating urban space for all Australians, including those with disabilities. However, our research also found that there were differences in the way people with different types of disabilities used smartphones. And while all our participants used smartphones, there was a range of factors that impacted the type and breadth of use of this essential technology. This survey builds on the findings of our initial research, capturing the specific role of smartphones in the everyday lives of vision-impaired Australians via an extensive survey. This survey is the first of its kind, providing a detailed snapshot of the role of the smartphone for over 800 people who are blind or have low vision. As the survey was being finalised at the end of March 2020, Australia began to feel the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. We took the opportunity to extend the initial study to conduct interviews online and over the telephone to explore the impact of the pandemic on people who are blind or have low vision, and the impact it had on how they make use of smartphone platforms. Acknowledgements. This project has been funded by the Australian Research Council and Curtin University. Vision Australia has been an important partner in the project. We would like to thank Vision Australia for their support and guidance on all parts of the project. We would like to specifically mention Bruce Maguire, Chris Edwards, and Rini Ekanaike. To our team of research assistants, Corinne Dale, Ellen Timmins, Joel Jose and May Bora, thank you for your dedication and efforts on this project. Finally, we would like to extend our thanks to all of the 845 people that completed our survey, and to those who gave us feedback on how their smartphone use changed during the COVID-19 pandemic. We could not have done this without your help. Executive Summary. This report explores the way Vision Australia clients are using smartphone technology in their everyday lives. It details findings of the research project, Smartphones and Equal Access for People Who Are Blind or Have Low Vision, which was conducted in collaboration with Vision Australia. The research centred on a survey conducted during February-March of 2020 that aimed to explore the usage patterns and experiences of using a smartphone for people with low vision or blindness. It aimed to discover how important the smartphone is for this cohort, what they use their device for, what limitations or obstacles they face, and what might make the smartphone more useful and accessible for them. The report has 3 parts. Part 1 begins with a background review of previous studies into how people who are blind or have low vision use smartphones, finding that studies have traditionally approached this from a technological perspective, with the aim to resolve accessibility issues with a technological solution. By comparison, this report focuses on the user, aiming to better understand the relationship between smartphone use and low vision and blind users in order to gauge if and where accessibility issues arise. Part 2 is concerned with the findings of, and offers discussion on, the results of the survey. A total of 845 people participated in the survey. Detailed insights were gained into 3 core components: participant demographics, smartphone use, and app use. Questions were designed to capture information on who owned and used a smartphone and the breadth and limitations on this use. As the survey drew to a conclusion towards the end of March 2020, Australia began to be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The effect of this on the way people with low vision or blindness use technology, including the smartphone, was anticipated to be significant. Part 3 of the report therefore communicates findings of an additional interview stage focused only on the effects of COVID-19. From a sample of 83 participants in the survey who had indicated they would like to be part of further research, 13 individuals across Australia between the ages of 23 and 83 were asked 8 further questions about their smartphone use during the COVID-19 pandemic in order to gauge if and how this threat to individual health, isolation, and rapidly shifting federal, state and regulations around social distancing shifted the way participants interacted with their smartphone. The key conclusions as a result of this survey are as follows. A significant proportion, 79%, of the blind community use a smartphone. A previous study of Vision Australia clients from 2015 had found that only 17% use of smartphone technology. Therefore, there has been a 365% growth in smartphone use by people who are blind or have low vision in less than 5 years. While age still plays a role in determining uptake, the age gap is decreasing and is only statistically significant in the over 75s. Age does play a role in the breadth of use of a smartphone, noticeable in app uptake and the broadest range of uses. The level of vision of participants and the duration in which people have experienced low vision or blindness also affect smartphone use. Accessibility apps were used by approximately 50% of participants, but many participants were unaware of these apps and their capabilities. those that do use accessibility apps still face a range of issues, limitations, and a lack of accessibility. Voice assistants, such as Siri, were the most popular accessibility feature of the phone, but other assistive features were less used. Again, level of visibility and a lack of familiarity with these features plays a significant role in their use. The recommendations of this report specify key suggestions for industry, government, service providers, and smartphone app designers and developers. We argue that, particularly in the context of the pandemic, the usability, compatibility, information and training on smartphone use is integral for people who are blind or have low vision. This report contains 5 major sections: the introduction, the background, the methodology, the results, and finally, our recommendations. I'll start now with the introduction. Smartphones have become an important part of our everyday lives, helping us to connect, collaborate, create, and undertake many everyday tasks. For people who are blind or have low vision, smartphones can also be an essential tool, particularly for facilitating independence and increasing access to information, products, and services. However, people who are blind or experience low vision rely on varying inbuilt features and apps for these devices to be useful and accessible for them. Smartphones and accessibility for people with disability has a long history. The technology enjoyed and depended on by the entire population is actually the direct result of adaptive technology designed to make the world more accessible for people that have various impairments. For example, the telephone was invented by Alexander Bell as a way to communicate with his mother, who is deaf. Innovations associated with the smartphone, such as touchscreens and anti-glare, are both adaptations designed for people with disability. Touchscreen evolved from Fingerworks, a gesture recognition company founded by Wayne Westerman after he acquired repetitive stress problems as a doctoral student. Similarly, anti-glare screens, while initially created for users who are blind, now allow everyone to use their smartphones outside and in the sunlight. While the smartphone is a mainstreamed rather than a specialized device, it still offers great potential for people with disability, and particularly those who are blind or have low vision, if it is made accessible. Smartphones are an essential telecommunications tool. Increasingly, both governments and businesses are embracing app-based methods of communication. However, for people who are blind or have low vision, the smartphone can be a source of anxiety and high financial costs. There are a number of ways smartphones can be made more accessible. These include voice-over screen readers, text resizing, zoom and magnification, contrast, color and brightness adjustments, audio description, and voice assistants such as Siri. Apps, both general and more specialized, accessibility-focused apps, can also greatly enhance the usability and accessibility of these devices. Smartphones and apps are often presented as an automatic source of inclusion, yet there is little research into the ways this group engage with mobile technologies. This survey is the first Australian research to comprehensively investigate patterns of usage and the perceived and actual barriers to smartphone use by people who are blind or have low vision. The survey aimed to find out about the usage patterns and the experiences of using a smartphone for people with low vision or blindness. We gathered insights into how important the smartphone is for Australians and what they use their device for, what limitations or obstacles they face, and what might make the smartphone more useful and accessible for them. This information is increasingly important in an aging society, as we know that vision loss occurs most often in older ages. It is also important in understanding whether smartphones do increase equality and accessibility for people who are blind or have low vision. We have also aimed to find out what currently limits the use of these devices. Lastly, we explored whether smartphones exacerbated experience of disability for some people, and if so, how this might be addressed. To provide a comprehensive overview of smartphone use by people who are blind in this country and improve access to these services, we need to investigate how consumers use existing apps and how they could be improved. This survey provides a previously unavailable resource on smartphone use by this cohort that can be distributed to key stakeholders. As the survey drew to a conclusion towards the end of March, Australia began to be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The effect of this on the way people with low vision or blindness use technology, including the smartphone, was anticipated to be significant. Thus, we undertook a set of interviews with a sample of the survey participants in order to gauge if and how this threat to individual health, isolation, and rapidly shifting federal and state regulations around social distancing might shift the way participants interacted with their smartphone. Due to the recency of this pandemic, there is a lack of research on how COVID-19 will impact the nature of smartphone use. What research has emerged has already flagged the possible ramifications of the global health crisis on digital inequalities. We are fortunate in the timing of this survey to contribute to what will no doubt be a burgeoning body of research in this area. Background. Please note, a number of references to existing research and various studies are cited, and you can find the full details of these in the reference list at the end of our written report. In the last decade, there has been a dramatic increase in the use of smartphones by the general population, and significant evidence that suggests people with disabilities are likewise avid users. However, there remains a lack of recent data on the uptake of smartphones by people with disabilities, and specifically people with vision impairments. Despite this, there is a growing body of research that has emerged in the past decade on the usability or potential use of smartphones by people with vision impairments. However, this research is largely derived from the field of science and technology studies. Thus, engagement with disability tends to be focused on technological solutions to accessibility issues. Examples include studies which present smartphone innovations or specific apps that increase accessibility. For example, a wayfinding system for blind users, a sensor for objects, or an interactive tactile smartphone map for the visually impaired user. This research, which represents only a few examples in a burgeoning collection of app-based accessibility studies, while valuable, largely examines practical strategies for improving usability, but is based on the capabilities or deficiencies of the device itself, rather than an understanding of its users. Therefore, despite an increase in the range of accessibility apps and features of the modern smartphone, there is a lack of research and information that is user-led, that questions how people with vision impairments use smartphones, what they use them for, and what limits their use. Some recent studies have aimed to address this gap in knowledge around the relationship between mainstream devices and disability. Crossland, Silva and Macedo, for example, surveyed people with vision impairments in Portugal, the UK and the US, finding an 81% uptake in smartphone use. Several larger surveys of smartphone use by people with disabilities have also been undertaken, but across a range of disability types, not just people with vision-based disability. For example, a 2016 survey titled Smartphone Use and Activities by People with Disabilities contained only 8% of responses by people who were blind or had low vision. A 2019 study of over 400 individuals across 7 countries found that 97% of those with vision impairment used a smartphone. Their sample showed that smartphones and tablets were replacing the use of traditional assistive devices for people with low vision. The research has also revealed the diversity of types of smartphone users within the blind and low vision community. They argue that the relationship between age and the proficiency of smartphone use was significant, as was the age in which participants lost their sight. This research is important not only for comparing the statistics in our own survey, but in providing some balance to the plethora of studies which assume the ways in which smartphones are utilised by the blind community. Other research has provided in-depth analysis of the limitations or problems faced by blind and low vision smartphone users. These studies, typically involving smaller data samples, workshops, or ethnographic approaches, have also contributed to developing a more nuanced understanding of user-led experiences of smartphone use. For example, a study by Rays, Cruz, Fisher and Reeves in 2020 aimed to garner a holistic perspective of the use of smartphones in everyday life for people with low vision or blindness, finding a range of competencies and adaptations used that extended beyond specific engagement with the device. While their research is based on a limited data sample of just 12, this study is important in shifting dominant research perspectives that are technology rather than user-driven. Building on this body of work, this study provides a significant indication of how many people with vision impairments are using smartphones in Australia, what they use their devices for, and how demographics impact upon this use. Methodology. This section explains how the survey was organised and undertaken. The initial objective of this research was to find out about the usage patterns and experiences of using a smartphone for people with low vision or blindness. In order to achieve a wide data set that accurately represented the Australian blind community, we constructed a survey that could be both completed online or through phone interviews. It was dispersed using Vision Australia client contact information and networks. Working in collaboration with Vision Australia, we drafted 24 questions that captured information on 3 core components: participant demographics, smartphone use, and app use. Questions were designed to capture information on who owned and used a smartphone and the breadth of this use. The final sample size was 845 participants. This was larger than initially predicted. Drawing on data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics National Health Survey, 131,500 people have partial or complete blindness. However, there are also other eye conditions which cause low vision. Thus, the total population of people who are blind or have low vision is estimated by Vision Australia to be 384,000 as of 2016. Thus, our sample of 845 respondents reflects a margin of error of 3%. Constructing an accessible and usable online survey was an integral part of this research. However, we found multiple accessibility and usability issues. We initially created our survey using Qualtrics, a reputable platform popular across Australian universities. In trials completed through Vision Australia, the survey was not compatible with several screen readers, with repeat reading occurring. When customer service reps from Qualtrics investigated this duplicate reading by various screen readers, they found that, quote, "The issue has been caused by our platform's design to be accessible to a wide range of third-party screen reader softwares. Some screen readers read one label type, some screen readers read another. As a result, to ensure universal screen reader compatibility, our surveys have the 2 different types of labels present, which means some screen readers will end up reading the question twice." End quote. When asked if this feature could be switched off or modified for our survey, they responded that they were not able to make this modification. No further action was taken by Qualtrics to alleviate the compatibility issues with screen reading software. Essentially, the platform's aim to make their surveys accessible to all undermined its usability. Beyond the repeat reading issues found in the Qualtrics survey platform, we also found consistent incompatibilities with different web browsers. This browser compatibility was also an issue with the second survey platform we used, SurveyMonkey. For example, neither platform worked reliably with Internet Explorer, and compatibility issues were found with VoiceOver software and Safari. In this instance, having already failed to establish compatibility with screen reading software using Qualtrics, it was determined that directing participants to use specific browsers when using SurveyMonkey would mitigate the remaining usability issues. We've chosen to highlight this specific usability-accessibility issue here, as we believe the problems encountered in our own research mirror many of the issues raised by our research participants as they attempt to navigate smartphones and the associated software. These issues only affected those who completed the online survey. Almost 2/3 of our responses were gathered directly by our research team from targeted phone calls to the Vision Australia client base. Recognising that not all members of the blind community would use a smartphone or access the internet, we designed the survey so that it could be read to participants over the phone and completed by the research team interviewing the individual online. We also recognise that the advertising and promotion of the survey, predominantly via Vision Australia's communications, would likely only capture active clients that consistently engaged with the service provider. The phone calls conducted by 4 interviewers over a 6-week period allowed us to capture a large sample size and one that's reflective of the age range of the blind community. This next section is the results. As noted before, 845 participants completed the survey. The majority of responses, 632, were gathered from phone-based surveys in which researchers filled out the online survey for the participant based on their responses over the phone. Of these participants, 79% owned a smartphone. However, the age of the participant also affected the likelihood of smartphone ownership, with 100% of those under 25 owning a smartphone, compared to 31% of those over 85. In contrast, a 2015 survey of Vision Australia clients found 17% used a smartphone. This percentage was heavily influenced by age, with 25% of those between 65 and 74 using a smartphone and just 2.8% of those over 75 using a smartphone. These results indicate a significant growth in the penetration of this technology in Australia's blind and low vision community over a period of less than 5 years. Recognising there was a range of vision experienced by people who are blind or have low vision, and that the level of vision may affect the way people use their smartphone, we asked participants to describe their level of vision. 26% said they had low vision, 45% had legal blindness, 20% had total blindness, and 10% described other vision impairments such as tunnel vision, macular degeneration, limited peripheral vision or blindness in one eye. 53% had experienced low vision for more than 5 years, 24% since birth, and 23% for less than 5 years. 30% of participants also experienced another disability, primarily a level of hearing loss. Our highest proportion of participants were between 75 and 84 years old. 21% were 55 to 64, and 21% were 65 to 74. Only 5% were over 84. 30% of our participants were under 55. Therefore, almost half of the participants in this survey were over 65 years old. This older subset was reflected in the question around income source. 45% received the age pension and 41% received disability support. 18% received paid income. Participants also cited income from other sources such as superannuation and investments. While the majority of participants lived in metropolitan areas, a significant number of people, 38%, lived in rural or regional Australia. Of the 79% of participants that owned a smartphone, 74% used an Apple iPhone and 26% used an Android, with Samsung being the most popular model. The accessibility features of the phone was a dominant reason for their phone choice, but compatibility with other technologies was cited by 19%. Recommendations by others also appeared as a strong reason in determining product choice. 6% noted that the price of the device and/or the plan also impacted their decision. This was supported by the results that showed that 84% obtained their phone via their own personal savings. Only 3% of participants had obtained a phone via the NDIS, and 5% had been gifted their phone. Those who used a smartphone used it throughout their everyday life, 84% citing that they used it throughout the day and for a broad range of purposes. While making and receiving calls was the most commonly cited use, 97%, there was a range of uses noted. The age of the participant affected the breadth of use. There was a significant reduction in the amount of people over 65 using their smartphone beyond phone calls. For example, 33% used it for emails, 24% for accessing the web, and 17% used social media. This is a reduction of over 25% in each category compared to participants under 65. The use of built-in assistive features was common across participants. 65% used a voiceover screen reader, 43% used text resizing, 41% used zoom and magnification, 32% used contrast, colour and brightness adjustments, and 18% used audio description. Voice assistants such as Siri were also popular, with 80% of participants using the program for a range of purposes. Beyond the smartphone, participants used a range of assistive technology. 33% used screen reading software, 34% used smart home devices, 27% used screen magnification software, and 9% used bone conduction headphones. 56% cited other assistive technology, with iPads and tablets being a dominant response, as well as computers, an Apple Watch, and a Daisy player. Accessibility apps were also used widely. Over 50% of participants responded to our question regarding the use of apps. AI-based apps were the most commonly used, followed by GPS navigation apps, reading apps, and human assistance apps. However, 13% of respondents stated that they had either never heard of these apps or had heard of them but did not use them or know how to use them. The most common apps used for navigating urban space were Google Maps or Apple Maps, Blind Square, Guide Dogs Australia, and Soundscape. Participants reflected on how these apps not only provided logistical assistance, but more independence. And this is a quote from one of our participants. I use Blind Square Navigation app, Soundscape Navigation app. I use these apps to assist me navigating streets, finding bus stops and train stations, and navigating back home. They give me independence to get around without the need for other assistance, e.g. a sighted guide. End quote. The amount of time participants had been blind or had developed low vision impacted upon app uptake. For those with less than 5 years' experience of their vision loss, only 29% used accessibility apps. There were also some poignant reflections from some participants on how the apps they use now, or do not use, may shift according to changing contexts. Quote, I currently don't use apps to help me get around, but in this time of social distancing with COVID-19, I anticipate a need to use something to help me follow someone into a medical consultation to avoid taking their arm and getting too close. End quote. These reflections prompted our follow-up interviews with some participants as to how their smartphone use had changed during the pandemic. In sourcing these apps, most participants used Vision Australia or another service. Family and friends and other people who are blind or have low vision were the other most common responses. Issues with the apps designed for people who are blind or have low vision were most commonly cited as glitches or technical issues. 38% expressed they were difficult to use or understand, and another 35% stated they were not fully accessible. When participants had issues with an app and found that it wasn't accessible, most chose to just delete it and not use it anymore. However, 31% did report inaccessible apps to the developer, and a further 21% contacted Vision Australia about the issues. Participants were less inclined to leave a negative review. When asked if there was an app participants would like to see developed that would enhance their everyday life, there were 3 dominant types of responses. Apps that are more accessible, apps that are simpler to use, and apps that are more accurate. Often, participants didn't suggest an entirely new app that they would like to see developed. Rather, they want existing apps to work better. And these are some quotes from our participants. Rather than apps, improve phone functionality and accessibility and compatibility of those features with apps. I'd like to see the weather app improved, more detailed, more user-friendly and accessible. Make apps more accessible, go through stricter requirements. I would like apps that would work reliably for people like me who have difficulty with clear speech and fine hand control, as Siri and gestures are not reliable enough for me to use independently. End quote. Those that did suggest new apps tended to align with those examples given in the question, such as apps that could read signs or help with navigation. Finally, when asked what Vision Australia could do to support people's use of smartphones, 65% wanted more information on the types of apps and smartphone features they could use. 65% also would like more training on how to use a smartphone, and 52% would like Vision Australia to provide more advocacy for the blind community to encourage smartphone and app developers to be more accessible. A further 35% of responses offered other suggestions, notably to assist in improving funding for smartphones, for example via the NDIS. The next section talks about people who don't use smartphones. Of the 18% of participants who stated they did not own a smartphone, a further 3% stated they did previously but don't anymore. 83% of participants who did not own a smartphone were over 65 years old. The reasons provided for not owning a smartphone included insufficient vision, 43%, not needing one in everyday life, 20%, a lack of familiarity with how to use them, 13%, and cost at 7%. Other participants used other technology such as a non-smartphone, an Apple Watch or an iPad. In comparison to the 2015 Vision Australia survey, a similar proportion, 47%, of the respondents said the reason they do not use a smartphone is because their vision inhibits them from doing so. These participants also cited using a range of other assistive technologies instead of a smartphone. 18% used smart home devices, 14% used screen magnification software, and 7% used screen readers. But 78% of respondents to this question listed other technology not including these options. When asked what support services like Vision Australia could do to support their use of smartphones, 37% wanted training, 34% wanted advocacy for their community to encourage smartphone and app developers to be more accessible, 37% wanted more information about smartphones and apps for people with low vision, and 17% would like facilitated connections between people who are blind or have low vision who use smartphones. Financial support or help obtaining funding for a smartphone was also noted by 9% of respondents. This is in line with the finding that only 1% of these participants were in paid employment. The research assistants conducting the survey over the phone were able to garner some important insights and responses that were not necessarily captured by the questions themselves. For example, many participants who did not use a smartphone believed they did not have enough vision to use one or used it in a limited manner. For example, just for phone calls. They felt their responses were not of value and, as such, either did not complete the survey or skipped most questions. This reflection is important for recognising the different ways in which a lack of accessibility is managed or accepted by individuals. The length of time participants had their smartphones also impacted responses. While the survey asked participants how long they had experienced blindness or low vision, the length of time they had been active smartphone users was not captured. Concurrently, there were several participants who used accessibility apps, but on devices other than a smartphone, such as a tablet. But this uptake was not captured in the scope of this survey. The final question, in which participants were asked to provide feedback on the ways in which Vision Australia might assist in smartphone use, was met with some uncertainty. For example, some interpreted the question as a rating of Vision Australia's service. Others noted that the question did not capture where participants feel the responsibility for accessibility lies, noting that they are happy with Vision Australia's service, but that the inaccessibility of smartphones and apps requires the developers to change their approach. Survey conclusions. The most significant conclusion that can be drawn from this research is that a large proportion of people who are blind or have low vision do use smartphones. They are a part of their everyday lives and used for a broad range of purposes. Furthermore, the broad adoption of this device is a recent phenomenon. There has been a 365% increase in smartphone use in less than 5 years. While age still plays a role in determining uptake, the age gap is decreasing and only statistically significant in the over 75s. We also observe that age does play a role in the breadth of use, as noticeable in app uptake and the broad range of uses. The level of visibility of participants and the duration in which people have experienced low vision or blindness also affects smartphone use, this being a key determinant in the reasons participants gave for not owning a smartphone. Accessibility apps were used by approximately 50% of participants, but many were unaware of these apps and their capabilities. Those that do use accessibility apps still face a range of issues, limitations, and a lack of accessibility. Voice assistants like Siri were the most popular accessibility feature of the phone, but other assistive features were less used. Again, level of visibility and a lack of familiarity with these features plays a significant role in their use. There is a broad desire for more information, education and assistance in using smartphones in the blind and low vision community. However, any possible intervention to increase the breadth of smartphone use is not a simple one-size-fits-all strategy. As our survey results have revealed, individual contexts, age, tech proficiency and level of vision all impact on the way people use their smartphone. Thus, returning to the deficiencies we identified in existing research, technology needs to be understood as it is used rather than as the solution to accessible use. This next section of the results focuses on the impact of COVID-19. Following the conclusion of the survey in mid-March 2020, Australia began experiencing a rapid increase in COVID-19 cases and entered an unparalleled time of public health controls and regulations, self-isolation and community health anxieties. As stay-at-home rules were enforced and businesses closed or moved online, there would likely be impacts upon how and what people use to stay connected, to mitigate a lack of face-to-face access to services and spend their time at home. As such, researchers on this project wanted to identify whether the COVID-19 pandemic had likewise affected the ways in which people with low vision or blindness use their smartphone. Out of the 83 individuals who had indicated they would like to be part of further research, 3 people responded to our email questions about changes to their smartphone use, and a further 10 people who had listed a phone call as their preferred contact responded to our questions via a phone interview. The age range of participants included 23 to 83, all but one of which owned a smartphone. Participants resided in a mixture of rural and urban locations across the states of Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia. They were asked 8 questions about their smartphone use during the COVID-19 pandemic in a semi-structured interview. Overall, smartphone use increased across all but one participant, who did not own a smartphone. However, what they used their smartphone for did not change significantly. Quote, "I always did use social media to connect with many friends and family, and that didn't change, other than I did use it more often." Another participant said, "I've used it a lot more. It was very helpful as I was working from home." Another person said, "I used my phone for a lot of different things before COVID, so I guess I just generally use it a lot more now. In particular, I used Teams and shopped more online." End quote. Conversely, for people who were newly blind or undergoing life changes, the COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on the way they used their phones. For these individuals, different functions, apps, and combined online-offline strategies were employed. Quote, "I'm newly blind and have been for less than a year. I was going to get assessments, voice readers, but this was halted or attempted over Zoom, and Zoom was really challenging and hard for this." Another participant said, "I had just received my guide dog. We weren't able to finish training, and then the trainer couldn't come because of COVID. I used my smartphone to help finish the training." End quote. For others, isolation was seen as an opportunity to use their smartphone for more leisure purposes, such as reading, watching television and videos. "I was connected to it 12 hours a day," said one participant. "I used the Vision Australia library a lot. I used it for reading as I had more time." Another participant noted that other leisure practices, such as playing games on a smartphone, were limited for people with low vision. There was also an increased use of communication apps and features, such as Zoom, social media, and various messaging apps. Zoom, Skype, and Teams were utilised more in professional contexts, such as for people working at home, with several participants noting that learning how to use these apps was a challenging process. Interestingly, despite accessibility barriers, most expressed that they would use the apps they adopted during COVID-19 again. Moreover, over half the participants interviewed saw the shift in increased use of smartphones and related technology during the pandemic as eliciting a cultural shift and would continue beyond the alleviation of social distancing restrictions. Quote, "Our workplace is using Teams a lot more, and I think they'll continue to do this. I will use the note-taking app and online shopping from Woolworths, and I'll try and get a new, better phone. I assume I will use Zoom, etc., as I think people will be working from home more. The office culture is changing anyway, regardless of my vision." End quote. Smartphones were also used creatively to circumnavigate the restrictions that COVID-19 brought on people's everyday lives. Quote, "My support walker would come and video the walks with my new guide dog. I would send the videos to my trainer, and we would later call to discuss how things were going. I took photographs of my disability card, which allowed people to come and take me for a walk and not be stopped by the police for breaking the rules." End quote. The cost associated with increased smartphone and associated technology use was varied. While many didn't identify a direct increase, other participants experienced a financial impact through increased internet use, cost per minute services such as IRA, or a reliance on support workers, taxis, and tech support. The Australian experience of the COVID-19 pandemic provides some unique insights into how people perceived the health concerns, experienced isolation, and interacted with the social distancing regulations. Though infection rates in Australia rapidly increased for a brief time, the spread of the virus was relatively contained. Thus, the fear of infection for many people was both brief and relatively localised. Most of the people interviewed were not overly concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on their own health, as they believed they had a statistically insignificant chance of contracting the virus. Many expressed that the threat of the virus was minimal in their area and did not affect everyday practices significantly. This feeling of being unaffected by the pandemic was also reiterated in the response to the question about whether they had downloaded the government's COVID-Safe app. Several participants did not believe it was relevant to them, as they either lived in a rural or remote area, did not travel, or did not use public facilities often. Furthermore, most participants expressed some skepticism about the app, both its effectiveness and the way their data would be used. Other participants stated that the app was not accessible to them. Quote, "When it was first downloaded onto my phone, there was only one button that was identifiable. I tried it, but it was quite difficult. I did download it, but my son had to do it for me." End quote. The responses from people interviewed about the effect on their smartphone use during the COVID-19 pandemic identify that the role of this everyday device is amplified in a health emergency context. The smartphone is used more, but not always in new ways. When participants did attempt to learn a new function or app, the process was often difficult and exacerbated by inaccessibility. Yet once mastered, the new app was appreciated and embraced. The limitations and inaccessibility of the device for different individuals is also magnified when alternative support structures are removed, exacerbating isolation and disconnection. Blind and low vision users employ creative and adaptive techniques, combining technology and human support to remove inaccessibility barriers and limitations imposed in a health emergency setting. A lack of uptake and skepticism about the COVID-Safe app mirrors findings on the broader community's perspective. Furthermore, as highlighted in previous research, people with disabilities may exhibit increased privacy concerns and participate in more active privacy management. It should also be noted that the interview responses provided were a snapshot of a response to a relatively short-lived period of isolation and regulation. The role and function of the smartphone for blind and low vision individuals may have needed to expand significantly as the health crisis is further protracted. Recommendations. This section discusses our recommendations for various sectors based on the research. Recommendations for government. The smartphone has become a significant tool for the blind community, and the development of a range of accessibility apps and inbuilt functions has supported this uptake. However, funding for smartphones as an accessibility tool remains heavily restricted. We recommend that the smartphone become recognised by the NDIS as a valid accessibility device for people with low vision or blindness. Given the respondents to our COVID-19 study represented a particularly vulnerable group of the population, both in terms of age and disability, the drawbacks expressed in relation to the federal government's contact tracing apps are particularly concerning. Any similar initiative in the future, both in Australia and internationally, will need to address as a priority the concerns raised here about accessibility and privacy, as this has clearly been a critical point of failure for the adoption of this app by this group. Recommendations for smartphone designers and app developers. App developers, device designers, and service providers need to be aware that the blind community are smartphone users. However, there is a myriad of types of users and a range of factors which impact use. Our own attempts to develop an accessible survey for this project highlight how important cross-platform compatibility is. Our participants actively use voice assistants, but limited uptake of other accessibility features suggests these features require further development or promotion. User-led research that captures the full spectrum of low vision and blind consumers should be at the forefront of accessibility, design, and development. While there have been significant improvements in creating accessible operating systems, mainstream app developers should make sure their smartphone apps are also accessible. Accessibility is not only the responsibility of smartphone designers. We recommend employing App Store accessibility policies, ensuring app developers meet access requirements for all users. Current App Store guidelines should likewise be expanded beyond the current technical focus to emphasize usability and operability for the end user. Recommendations for industry. Our survey has identified that people who are blind or have low vision are a significant smartphone consumer base, using their devices for banking, online shopping, and many other purposes. Capitalizing on this increasing use of smartphones and apps requires both targeted information for the blind community on what apps are available and ensuring their accessibility. Simply making more apps is not a remedy for increasing consumers. Rather, users ask for compatibility, usability, and reliability. The emphasis is on quality rather than quantity. People who are blind or have low vision are also avid entertainment and media consumers, with a significant proportion, 57%, using their smartphone to access podcasts, listen to music, or the radio. With the onset of audio description on broadcast television, now is an opportunity for online videos and television to also embrace this accessible technology. Recommendations for service providers for the blind and low vision community. Service providers, and specifically Vision Australia, play a crucial role in the way people with low vision or blindness use their smartphones. Over 50% consulted Vision Australia when determining what features or apps of their smartphone could be useful for them. While many of our respondents spoke positively about the organisation, more information and education about the capabilities and functions of their smartphones were desired, with 37% wanting more education and training and a further 30% wanting more information about smartphones. The cost and location of services remains a contributing factor in the uptake and use of smartphones, with clients in rural areas or with less financial support requesting more assistance. Recommendations across all sectors. The experience of the COVID-19 pandemic is an opportunity to consider how a health emergency, and indeed any large emergency context, exacerbates digital inequalities. As online shopping, telehealth, and video-audio conference apps become normalised during and post-pandemic, usability, compatibility, information about and training in these services should be proactive rather than reactive. Our research occurred at a relatively early stage of the pandemic and indicated an increased use of and reliance on mobile digital technology in general and smartphones in particular. As the consequences of this public health emergency continue to evolve, it is important that access to these devices and associated technologies by all people, and particularly those with blindness or low vision, are monitored and enabled. Finally, we recommend that the responsibility for accessibility is embraced and shared across all sectors, recognising that access is not simply established through device design, but achieved through responsive industry, service provider, and government policies. We have now reached the end of this recording of Smartphones and Equal Access for People Who Are Blind or Have Low Vision, authored by Catherine Locke, Katie Ellis, Mike Kent, Leanne McRae and Gwyneth Peaty. If you would like any more information, please contact Vision Australia or email Katie Ellis, katie.ellis@curtin.edu.au. A detailed hard copy with a list of references and sources can be made available on request. Thank you for listening.